I want to start with going back into time. If you think back to your early ages, were you a PC gamer, Atari 2600 player, or the first Nintendo games? How did you enter the gaming sphere? I'll start with Valentina.
Good, it's on. My first experience with games was when my uncle gave me a Game Boy for Christmas. I didn't ask for it, but I played it for the rest of the days. And after that, at every family gathering, I would just sit there and play Pokemon or Tetris. And then I got my Nintendo 64, so it was that era, not that long ago. But yeah, it just became this social thing for me and my friends. And I just grew up with that as a medium in my life. And when I grew older, I realized I like art and psychology and computer science. And there was this combination of all these things. So then I just got into game development. I studied game design specifically, so had this all-round package.
Just one question. Which game was your favorite on the Game Boy?
On the Game Boy, my favorite, I think just Pokemon Blue. Yeah. Simple, but great.
All right, so I think I actually started as a little boy doing electronics. That's when I got a computer from our neighbor, which was a Commodore VC20, a really piece of shit, actually. I didn't have money back then because I was very little for a disk drive or actually even a tape drive. So whenever I actually typed and programmed something and turned it off, it was lost. That really annoyed me. So at some point I really want to get an own computer so that also my neighbors stopped bugging me. And I think when I was 9, I got a C64 back then. Started to play some really great games. I think one of my all-time favorites out of that time still is They Stole a Million. Some may remember, beginning of the 80s was a burglary simulation game, a lot like The Clue, which is also by now pretty old and also a great game. Then at one point I kind of evolved to a PC gamer, which I still am. So yeah, that's pretty much where I come from.
So I'm old. So I remember my Apple IIe. I had a modem in 1984. Would you believe that? 96 baud of sheer power. It was amazing. I actually could connect to America and play a game called Shades. It took me about a minute and a half to type anything, in which time I'd be dead because they had no latency in the States and we had all the latency. Anyway, so that's kind of the era I realized that I had no skills. I knew how to tell other people what to do though. And so by 1987 I made my first pitch to, I think it was Rainbow. No, Rainbird Software, I think it was. Age 18, there were 3 of us. We pitched our game and we got soundly rejected. And I realized I actually had to go and learn something. And here I am, several years later trying to make games again.
Let's jump into the future. Who of you 3 owns a VR headset? A VR headset.
What do you mean, A?
Or 2?
Yeah, I have 2.
Want to buy one?
Own one. No.
So I count Daydream. Actually, I've got technically 3. Daydream, the Samsung Gear VR, and I've got the PSVR. So technically that's 3, isn't it?
Yeah. So Valentina had it in her presentation also that games have the potential of becoming immortal, mainly because of the distortion thing where you are disturbed as a player. But we are also talking about, video games or technical advancement killing other media. We didn't see that so far. Is there, now with VR and total immersion, a potential that we will finally reach that goal, that the analog era is dead? Do you think so?
The thing is, there is a reason why we still have movies and we still have literature, because each medium has an own language and own advantages and disadvantages, and they're not just gonna cancel each other out. They can coexist, and I think it's going to be similar with VR games and AR games, and the console and PC games, because they're just totally different ways of interacting with the game. Usually you have this rectangular window, you're an observer, even if you can interact with that world, you always have this very clear border. You know you're not in the game, you're just controlling a toy. But with VR, your brain suddenly thinks that you're in this other world. And it's really easy to, you're intellectually aware of it, but not instinctually aware of it. So that VR games are more of an acting, it's like acting a story instead of playing a system of a story as in a game. But there are a lot of restrictions that come with that. For example, the perspective. You probably have first-person perspective or like an omnipresent perspective, but you're extremely limited with what you can do with the camera. Forget about cuts, at least frequent cuts. Time progression works differently, and where the player looks, because you can control where they look. They can look there and there and there, and that's the great advantage and the great problem with VR, that you have to think about new means of telling a story and directing a player's attention with sound or movement, and you have to think about what areas will be their main focal point, what's in their peripheral view, where would they never look, like right behind them? They're probably not going to look there. And yeah, it's all these limitations also relate to the time you can spend in a VR game because of motion sickness, because your brain expects things to happen a certain way, and if they don't, you just get motion sickness. And yeah, because of these completely different functionings and limitations, it's a whole new medium that will not just substitute the other. I'm just going to give the microphone before.
Now, let me ask Marc another question. So with VR, we see a merging of the output and input interface in a new dimension. At Ubisoft Blue Byte, how much do you consider new interfaces for your upcoming titles, how you design them, how do you design the gameplay experiences? Is like a crazy interface is something you think about? Is curved screens something you have in mind, the VR headsets, or do you still focus on the classical mouse keyboard interface when you think about new titles?
Well, probably I'm not the best person to actually talk to interfaces, since my subject is a little bit in another different area. So, I don't know. Oscar, is that something you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got loads of stuff to talk about this stuff. I get really excited about this area because I think we're only seeing kind of the current things that we can do with the current tech. I was in a room the other day, and it's an office room, normal office, not a games-related thing. The setup had been done by the guy who did the setup for Minority Report, and there were cameras on these massive TV screens, and we just basically swiped something onto that screen, and then we swiped it over to that screen, and it was just worked in real life. And that's not VR though. It's not. Why is that relevant to VR? Because I think actually what we're talking about is something much more fundamental, which is we're still working out how we're going to get visual computing to actually affect the way we live and work our everyday lives. And some of those are going to be with a goggle on. Some of those are going to be with glasses that, directly inject light into our retinas. It sounds scary. It's not that scary. Well, it shouldn't be that scary if it's done right. But it's cool stuff. I mean, and actually, when you see what people do, whether it's AR, VR, or whatever, each of these elements, each of these different acronyms we keep hearing, are all experiments. They're all amazing experiments. We're in an amazing time where people are testing how we're going to interact with computer technology and data in our everyday lives. That's magic, genuine magic. In 10 years' time, our kids are not going to be able to understand that in fact, my son, who's 18, still doesn't understand about what a dial-up modem is. It's going to be the same for our next generation, trying to explain to them what it was like to interact with a mouse and keyboard alone. I'm not sure they'll go away, but to interact with a mouse and keyboard alone is not going to make sense. They won't need to have explained to them what it's like to have presence. That moment when you're sat in a VR experience where you forget that you're in the real world. The classic example of that for me was the Portal demo that was on, I think, 5. There was a moment where a robot comes into the room and you find yourself stepping back out of its way. It isn't real, it isn't there, and yet you still step back. And why? Because we completely absorb ourselves in these experiences, and that's magic, and we should look forward to it.
Another way, I have my own, thank you. Another way of magic is like the artificial intelligence, and I hope this time I'm right with challenging you with the question on that, okay. So like the virtual characters, but also like the open worlds, Valentina was mentioning also like, okay, the challenge of suddenly being controlled by this AI, they want to do something and you need to follow as a player, etc. That's definitely something which the new CPU power allows us to do. What's your take on that? Is it the future of the video games industry and new game design models is the artificial intelligence?
Yeah, for sure. The current areas where in AI research and progress is being made will help us to deliver a lot more than we used to be able to do. I'm not actually less talking about how we control NSC characters or something like this in game, but to give you an example, if we really want to deliver a stunning virtual world which the player can immerse in, because now the player is not just looking at a 2D or a 3D representation of that world anymore, but really is part of that world, can really look into details in this world, look behind every rock basically. We need to have that defined, we need to have that created. This will mean if we have a large world that the amount of assets we need to produce, the level of detail we need to put into this is something that is not really possible anymore with, let's say, human handcrafted work. And that's where we see now AI processes coming into life basically. Just our presentation from the University of Lyon, they are basically having an AI trained with real world features of terrain. And so now as a game designer I can grow and I can draw up very basic function blocks of a terrain and say, okay, mountain be here, dragon be there. And basically what I get is a very detailed terrain which looks very organic because all the learnings that are applied are taken from planet Earth and they are looking like what we see outside actually.
Will you be obsolete as a game designer in the future when the computers can do your work?
I think actually game designer, the role of the game designer is just changing. That in a way that we're not necessarily designing every step of the way, but rather creating game systems, systems that AIs work with, or algorithms, and systems that player can interact with. We can also see that in all of these games that are coming out right now, where player-generated content is actually a big thing, like Minecraft or Little Big Planet, where we basically, as game designers, create worlds and sandboxes, put in a few algorithms at part, like in Minecraft, and then the player creates the content and tells the story through that content, and the game designers basically the one who thinks of the blocks.
Yeah, but just wait one more word on that. You're totally right. I think we see a shift for a game designer more from the conventional, let's say, gut-driven design to a more technical game design, something where you will need to express what you were thinking, not in words, but really in rule sets, which are then processable.
Yeah, and I kind of get this kind of experience because I was home architect on a thing called PlayStation Home. I don't know if anyone will remember it. It was a virtual world that PlayStation had, and it was a very similar kind of principle. We had these external developers who were going to make the actual games. So I didn't get to actually make that many actual games. I just got to sort of help provide the toolkit for the other people. However, what I think is interesting, particularly where we are right now, is I think the interesting part for me is the machine learning aspect. So what we're looking at is not necessarily the AI itself, the decisions made by the AI, but the ability for the tools to be able to populate information to us that allows us to make better decisions. I think human beings are really good at making leaps of faith, leaps of judgment, to be able to provide these sort of creative sparks that puts together, 2 and 2 and makes 5. I think we're still a little way off the majority of computing AIs to come up with works of creative art that we can't differentiate, can't distinguish. Although that has happened, there is some incredible music out there, and you wouldn't know that it was made by a computer or a human being. Turns out it was made by a computer. So these things are happening. These kind of changes are happening. But I still think there's plenty of room left for us human beings to be able to add something to that. Not least because the point of this journey, for me at least anyway, is we have a story to tell. We have it's a means of communication first and foremost. But it's a communication form where we do. We're not just shown. If you think about kind of the earlier conversation where we were talking about why books and films still exist, they're means of communication where we're shown, we're not told. And I think realizing the role of these massively incredible, important technologies in how we can be better at being human beings and communicating, that's where the magic lies again.
To jump topic again, data. Now, you mentioned it a bit, and Unity has lots of plugins to collect player data, etc. When we saw Thomas presenting his massive stream flow, the old C64s wouldn't even be able to play the graphic, I guess. But now we have, on top of the whole graphical stuff, the worlds, the AI, etc. We have shitload of player data.
Absolutely.
How far are we away of having a personalized Far Cry, except for the narrative?
Well, there's nothing potentially there's nothing to stop you having that right now. It's really just an issue of content creation. In fact, in some ways, you do have that. A lot of games are frameworks in which you explore and you make your own experience, like the user-generated content we talked about. But I think the stuff that I found really magical is the complete shift from the days when I was at Sony. We had to basically convince everybody that the idea that collecting data was a good idea, that there'd be any value in it at all. Literally, 2008, we were still trying to convince people that it was a good idea to capture information about what players did, because designers knew best. I say that as somebody who thinks of themselves as a designer. But as we get that information, as we start realizing how we can use it, as we can start looking at what people do, not what they tell us they do, really, really big insights start appearing. You get real shocks, things that you thought were absolutely true, you were told, you were taught, and turn out to be complete rubbish. I had a massively wonderful experience last Monday at Pocket Gamer. I was introducing a panel on advertising. I'm a trained marketeer. I actually do have some skills in that area. And we were shown 2 ads, and we were told to guess which ones are the ones that worked and which ones are the ones that didn't. I got every single one wrong. And I would have chosen the wrong ads, I would have chosen the wrong experience, but the data would have told me which one to go for. Data is absolutely critical to us doing our jobs better.
Yeah, we see that games now use more big data approaches to actually tailor the gaming experience more towards one which is really what people want. And often actually people, as you said, cannot really tell you what they like. But actually by overlooking game sessions, by analyzing game sessions, actually down to the level to see where actually people have been going in my levels, what kind of maps were played in multiplayer games, where did people concentrate, where did they make good or actually bad experiences, is something which will actually generate a huge amount of data, but putting this into your game design or actually making this work for your game is something which is becoming more and more important. So we see in some games now that in a multiplayer, like let's say Counter-Strike type of games, people basically rate their experience directly after playing a map, and the data and the analysis of that data is totally valuable when you create new maps to really get something that people want to play. And I think it's going to be more and more important. It's, I think, one of the lessons we learned from free-to-play browser games who have doing that type of thing basically from the beginning on, because their analytics tools were, I think, there because of all the web technology they used, and it's making its way into AAA titles as well now.
Can I just follow up on Marc, please? That's still asynchronous, right? So we analyze the data, then we build a new map and stuff. How far away are we from real-time, personalized experiences in complex games?
Well, I think there's some approaches where we could do simple things, but really on the fly generating something. I would say I have some ideas on that, but most of that would be more in the areas of research and development at the moment, and not into things at least I have seen so far.
In the fields of monetization and how showing people offers that they would actually be interested in, that's already happening. That's happening on a daily basis with lots of different companies. There's companies like D-Media who've done a fantastic back-end platform that looks exactly at that. People like Scientific Revenue, DNA. And actually, if you look at some of the data points, by the way, don't be frightened of data. Data is your friend. You don't have to. You don't have to be the best mathematician. What you have to do is just know what information to capture. And the trick is understanding what it is, where there's a decision being made by the player, not by the game. If you can capture those moments and then just get a graph of all those moments over time and look at the percentage of users on that day doing those things, then look at the gaps. Because you'll see dropouts, drop. But if you do it down on everything that somebody might do, okay, that's a bit complicated, but just do enough of them, the highlights, you will be able to see exactly where people are dropping out. And if that's the only thing you do, you'll make a better game.
Time's almost up. Are there questions from the audience? The audience has the chance to ask a question. You win. Microphone, please.
Hi. So we talked a lot about artificial intelligence and I'm interested in how that relates to the capture of data. Because I think it's true that currently, when we're developing these new algorithms, it will be mainly at first that we augment the human designers. But I think probably there's a tendency, as the algorithms get better and we collect better data with these algorithms, we probably reach some threshold where the algorithms are just better at everything than the human designers. And my question is, would that be a good thing? And if yes, what would we then do if that were to happen?
Okay, so to rephrase, you say that you see that the AI approach is basically used in analyzing the big data we collect, and if that is good or bad, basically. So we are already feeding AIs with data sets which we gather also from users. So that is done talk to the big data people, and they have been using these approaches since years. These approaches get better and better. We see that right now a lot of these AI systems become into public. I just read last week of something where now AI will basically put pictures of somebody in a movie onto the head of somebody else, and of course what people do use it for porn. So is it good or bad? It's always what we actually make use of it. In theory, I think for data collection, an algorithm is designed to be better than a human at this. And do we responsibly and work with this? I think it's something that is up to us. So I think we should, but there is power of evil with it, or you could say.
If so, super short, please.
Yeah. The thing is, algorithms decide by themselves what they're supposed to do. So this decision, what is the goal of this game level, for example, what are we trying to achieve, is something that humans still have to decide. So they have to be the conceptualists, so to say, and the AI is the executive, so to say.
I think that's the crux of it. Yes, we know that in routine, repeatable tasks, we're going to get to the stage where computers can do them better than us. Driving, we won't be driving in 10 years probably, except for hobbies. You know, there's no any point in driving a car because it'll be a lot safer not to let the car do it for you. However, people will do it because it's fun. So people will still make games, even if the algorithms ever got to the stage where they could make those cognitive leaps and those kind of decision processes, because we don't make games just because a game should exist. We make games because A, we want to, and B, because there's an audience who wants to play them. And at some point, if you can't have people doing and making things, they won't be able to afford to do anything, and therefore there's no customer base for those things. So I think we could go down the rabbit hole and talk about singularities. I just don't think that human beings have been very good at adapting. I think we'll adapt again.
Okay, the final last question. I hope it's not too mean. Is there anything in the current state of technology that really annoys you? Oscar.
Oh, it's just everything that I always seem to be thinking about the technical experience that is promised by the current experience. So I'm always 10 years ahead. So back in 2002, I had a smartphone, a Motorola A1000, and I didn't understand why not everybody in the world had to have a smartphone. Now we're in 2018, and everybody has a smartphone. And I'm going, hang on a minute, why haven't I got the fold-out phone, the Samsung Galaxy X, or the Surface mobile device that they're talking about? Why haven't I got that now? I'm always constantly frustrated. The things that seem so obvious to me aren't there for 10 years. And the whole point of that long rambling statement is I'm generally wrong.
So, technology-wise, I think it's a progress. We will not stop progress, and I think actually that's quite good. While I see that, I have the feeling right now that the human side sometimes is a bit left behind. If I look in online, any kind of online medium, people tend to forget that they often deal with humans. So maybe the technology disguises this a little bit. So I hope that we will focus more on direct human-to-human communication, that people become aware that they maybe should not troll around.
I can agree there. I'll just go on to a complete tangent. A technological development that has really annoyed me is the tendency towards online gaming and away from local co-op or against other players. Okay, it's great that I can play with my friend from the other end of the world, but what about my friends right here on my couch? It's all about just watching others play single-player games, and that's fun too. I mean, I do that as well, but you just want great local co-op games, and there are so few on the market, and that really annoys me.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we need to wrap up. So give a big round of applause to our experts here. Thank you.